Professor Grace Gu. Please share your screen. And she's an assistant professor at UC Berkeley. She works on mechanics and 4D printing. Grace, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Can you hear me? Hopefully it works. And thanks for the introduction. And Professor Elliott, such an inspiring talk. I learned so much. So very exciting. So good afternoon, everyone. Great to meet you virtually. Very excited to be here and hope to interact with you, hopefully in the future at an in-person conference. Excited to share with you my research on computational and experimental analysis of pneumatically actuated robotic devices. And I want to quickly thank Amazon for funding our research. We really appreciate the support. I want to first begin with a discussion on the research focus in my group. We're interested in developing a platform that integrates computation, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, and experiments to design materials with specific functions and desired properties. At the same time, we're really interested in developing new additive manufacturing technologies to realize material designs that are multifunctional, multi-scale, and also multi-material. So in general, we're really interested in developing and designing new materials for various applications. And we're excited to apply our frameworks to the applications in soft robotics. As we know, soft robotics, owing to their compliance, offer reliable handling of delicate objects, better durability, and safer human-machine interaction over conventional robots. And their soft actuators are mainly powered through two means. One is a hydraulic or pneumatic pressure, or secondly, the pulling of artificial tendons. And for our work, we were interested in focusing on this first approach where we actuate using pressure. And for a couple of reasons. One is that it's usually it's due to simplicity in assembly. It's also very compatible with 3D printing, and we can reduce the number of parts or motors needed for our system. So we're going to focus on this idea of pneumatic actuation for soft robotics. Here are some examples of pneumatic actuators used in literature or developed in literature. And some of these designs, current designs, face challenges when it comes to dexterity. So poor control over intricate motion. And the reason is that these designs, they extend through the entire length. So you can see that these kind of bellows, they extend through the entire length. And so we were wondering, what if we tried to mimic like hands by adding joints to these kind of designs? Maybe it will help to overcome some of the limitations in pneumatic actuators. And so this idea is that we're really interested in developing this composite structure or composite design made up of soft joints and connected by rigid parts. And so the question that we wanted to answer is, how should we design this soft joint? What kind of tools that we need? What kind of materials should we use? And what should it look like? And so we're trying to focus on this soft joint that's connected by these rigid parts. And hopefully with our designs, we can help to increase dexterity of these soft pneumatic actuators. So before we actually jump into the design, we were looking into what kind of performance criteria should we actually design for? What kind of things that we actually care about? So there's three things that we kind of pinpointed out. One is on range of actuation, so this bending angle. Oh, and I want to point out this is the composite structure we're looking at, where we have these rigid parts connected by these, shown here in black color, connected by soft joints, which is shown here in red. And so one of the first for performance criteria we're thinking about is basically the range of actuation, or this bending angle that these joints have. And so this will allow us to pick up objects that have weird shapes, have very complicated shapes. Second performance criteria we're looking into is actuation force, or torque, being able to pick up objects that are very heavy, so have a lot of weight. And lastly, range of actuation is very important, and also torque is very important. But if it only lasts for one cycle, perhaps in a warehouse, then it's not as useful as we would like. And so the last performance criteria we're looking into, or we're hoping to look into, is fatigue. So be able to develop something that has great performance in the first two, but also being able to last for many cycles in the warehouse. And so in general, we understand that, so these are the three performance criteria that we're trying to design for. And in general, we understand that this design of this joint, so this is an example of it. Let's just say this is pinpointed out the joint, and showing here, this is actually it being pressurized. The design of the joint is going to affect the performance criteria or the properties of this joint, or the properties of this entire gripper. And so we want to understand specifically, fundamentally, what is the, oftentimes structure property relationships in this entire system? How does design actually dictate the performance? And so for our first study, we wanted to focus on range of actuation. And design for bending angle. So bending angle is sort of this. So let's just say this is a soft joint, and this is the angle here. So how we want to maximize how much it bends, and so we want to develop this framework to optimize the bending angle for this soft joint. And we're going to use the numerical simulations called finite element simulations to study this, to do this optimization problem. Secondly, we want to actually validate our results using 3D printing and experiments. And we were interested in 3D printing because it allows for fast prototyping, and interfaces well with these soft robotics. And then lastly, we actually want to create this entire gripper design, this composite structure I was talking about. And so we actually want to create, how actually develop this full gripper design with rigid components, so that with soft joints connected with the rigid components, and actually pick up objects of various shapes. And so I'll show that at the very end, though. And so here again, our goal is to understand the entire design space. How does this design of the soft joint affect the performance or the dexterity and control of the gripper? And so, this is the first step usually is to create our model, and we want to parameterize our joint. We can start, there's a lot, our design space is large, but we want to sort of narrow down and focus on the important parameters for our study. And I would say that this is the step that we spent a very long time on, figuring out, what are the actual parameters that are important. Some parameters, so we did some preliminary simulations and also preliminary experiments to narrow down what kind of parameters are important. So some parameters, if you increase the size, decrease that size, it doesn't really affect the range of actuation or bending angle. So we didn't really want to focus on those parameters. And so here, we really narrowed down to three main parameters. One is, let's just say this is the joint, and these are, I'm going to call them bellows. And one parameter that we found was pretty important is the width of the bellow. Another parameter is the height of the bellow. And we also looked briefly into the thickness or the depths of this joint. And so this one step is to figure out these parameters. The next step is actually to figure out what kind of materials that we want to use. So we started off using TPU. And TPU was fine if you're printing with this type of material, but the range of actuation wasn't as high as we would actually like. And so we moved on to one of the very soft materials that can be printed using fused deposition modeling, or FDM printers. And this material is called NinjaFlex. Perhaps some of you have worked with it before. This material is very soft, so it's softer than TPU, so it could bend more. But the challenge of this material is that it's very difficult to print with. And so we spent a very long time optimizing printing parameters to be able to actually print NinjaFlex reliably, very reliably. So this is what we spent a lot of time on, is figuring out how do we actually print with NinjaFlex materials. And lastly, the structure is actually hollow inside, right? We actually pressurize this. And so how do we actually print this structure that is enclosed, but is very hollow inside without the use of support material? Because this is enclosed, it's very difficult for us to actually remove the support material if we need to print with it. And so we use different techniques of bridging techniques in printing to be able to print this type of joint. And so a lot of consideration was taken into account when we were parameterizing the joint. I would say this is the place where we spent really the most amount of time on in our project. And so, this is a parameterized joint, and we wanted to create our numerical model. So again, we use finite element analysis, and there was these are the boundary conditions. So we have region A it's held fixed. We have symmetry in region B, and in region C, this is the region we actually pressurized in our model. And so we can see that our designs can actually range very widely. And so we use adaptive meshing to accommodate changes in geometry for different simulation runs. And so we ran hundreds of finite element simulations to train a support vector regression model. And this is the comparison between simulation and model response. And there's quite a good agreement. And what's nice about SVR is that it allowed us to visualize quite nicely and create this contour plot of the relationships between bellow width and bellow height and the bending angle. And so you can sort of see this in this contour plot. And so for now, I mentioned there's 3 parameters, but I mainly plotted bellow width and bellow height for easier visualization. And so you can see here from our model that there's actually, there's this optimum value for bellow width and also bellow height shown here in this one that leads to the highest bending angle. And so here I pinpointed 3 points here, and we want to see what these designs that have very vastly different performance, what do they actually look like? And also we really wanted to validate our simulations. And so we 3D printed these 3 designs from these 3 points, and they're shown here. So these are 3D printed designs, and they're actually actuated, so you can see how much they actually bend. And these are our 3 simulation results. We did a slice so we can look at the strain field. And this is a comparison of bending angle from our experiments versus our simulation and our SVR model as well. And you can see that the experimental trends match pretty well with our models and our simulations. And so what's nice is that once we have this validated model, we can start to change other parameters as needed, and we can study different materials. So that's what's nice about having this computational model. And so, in addition to being able to develop this model to predict, let's just say, bending angle, what we found was really interesting is that we can actually see mechanisms, fundamental mechanisms that's happening during the actuation that would be really difficult to see in experiments. So this is a strain field plotted here of a joint, and we took a slice. And so, this is very difficult. You won't be able to do this in experiments. And you can see here that what's actually driving the actuation is that you see these side walls of the valleys of the bellows. And so you can see here that when it's actually actuated, there's these valleys. And these valleys are places that have pretty high strain. And this strain, this valleys, they actually act like pivots. And so this actually enables the actuation. And typically what we found is that the thinner bellows result in bellows with wider valleys, and which actually increases the compliance of these valleys. And so it helps to, again, enable actuation. And so this is one thing I think that's nice that we can gain from finite element simulations. So again, I mentioned briefly that we also looked into this thickness parameter. We found that in general, like with this bellow height and bellow width, and this is the performance from when we changed thickness, we doubled thickness. And we found that there was a factor of 2 increase in bending when thickness is doubled. So not a very significant effect, and not a very unsurprising effect shown here from the thickness parameter. And in addition, I know I'm running out of time. We want to look at, how the bending angle changes with pressure. So these are experimental results. And so these are increasing in pressure and what happens to the bending angle as expected. Typically, if you increase the pressure, these again are for the 3 design points. If you increase the pressure, your bending angle starts to increase. But what we found was really surprising is that we also looked briefly into torque in this work. And so using a mass scale and a fixture, and we plotted torque for the 3 different designs. And what you'll see is that, the torque and the bending angle, they don't completely align. So it doesn't mean if you have actually, the best bending angle doesn't necessarily have, the design that has the best bending angle doesn't necessarily have the best torque output. And so, that makes us believe that there must be some trade-off here, so there's this trade-off, and we actually want to explore this trade-off in future work, understanding, can we actually balance the two? Because we care about actuation force and actuation range, right? So how do we balance the two with our given design? And so that's sort of future work that we're looking into. And so I have 1 or 2 more slides. We talked about creating this composite design. And so here is our, what our flow gripper would look like. Again, here we have these soft joints, and they're connected by these rigid parts, and then they're actuated. And so with pressure, and these are sort of connected by like a Lego-like kind of, and they're all 3D printed, and it's connected by like a Lego-like connection. And we here show like 3 different gestures, so picking up really different objects. These objects are also 3D printed, and you can see that we can actually create this versatile gripper using this composite structure that can pick up a variety of different objects. And so this is my last slide that, I mentioned also fatigue that we're interested in. Modeling torque is definitely possible, and we recently got some more results modeling torque in simulation. We found that modeling fatigue is actually really difficult. So if any of you guys actually have experience modeling fatigue of these robotic actuators, we would love to chat with you. So in general, we're interested in how does number of cycles after we use this actuator, how does that actually change the bending angle or the range of actuation and the torque of these grippers. So we envision that in general, for these two performance criteria, with as a number of cycles that you're operating in, it would start to decrease in performance. All right, so that's our general intuition. But how fast is this decrease, right? For each of these types of performance criteria. Is it very steep, right? And is there a way we can actually change the design? Maybe we can face some little other trade-offs to have less steep decrease in these performance criteria. And so this is something that we're also looking into as well. And love to chat if any of you have experience in this area. All right, that's the end of my talk, and I just want to thank my collaborators and also my students and funding sources. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah, Grace, thanks for your talk. And I think it's really a comprehensive approach from including design, a little bit of AI, and also computation. Thank you for your talk. Yeah.